Hi, Year 12. So this is Friday's lesson. Obviously, you did your assessment yesterday, and we'll be doing our whole class feedback on that next week when I've had a chance to mark everybody's. But for today, we're ploughing on with our attachment topic, and we are going to be moving on slightly today to look at something called Ainsworth's strange situation. Ainsworth being the researcher, and the strange situation being what she named her particular study. But before we plough on and do that, let's have a little look at your retrieval. And I would like you to do this properly. So pausing the video and actually really retrieving that knowledge. If you've got a printer, that's great. You could just print out this one slide. But if you haven't got a printer, it really doesn't matter. It's a case of jotting down the key information, because the purpose of retrieval activities like this one is not about having some perfect complete product at the end of it. You've already got your notes. The purpose is to actually have to make you think. And we know that from the memory topic, don't we? That we put things into our long-term memory. The only way we can encode things into our long-term memory so that we really, really know them is to regularly have to bring them to the forefront to retrieve them. And that makes those connections stronger. And that's exactly the purpose of this. So don't be tempted. I'm sure you wouldn't, I'm sure. But don't be tempted to just think, oh, well, I'll let the video play on because Miss is going to do the answers in a minute. I am, but that would be pointless. You wouldn't be getting anything from that. Okay. So we've got a bit of a different one today. I'm asking you to find the three names for the descriptions in the heads there. The find and fix mistakes. So each one of those statements has something wrong with it. You've got to use your knowledge to identify what. I want 3 stages of attachment, 3 features of Bowlby's evolutionary theory, and 3 weaknesses. So we're putting our evaluation heads on of the learning theory. And then the last activity, that on the other hand, is making you think about an alternative perspective. So we know when we look at attachment, we've got 2 big theories. One's the alternative to the other. So I'm asking you to think about it from that point of view. Okay, so pause and have a good go. Give yourself 5 minutes for that task. So let's review the answers. So of course it was Schafer and Emerson. I've just spotted there should be a H in there. Schafer and Emerson who carried out that longitudinal observation study of those families in Glasgow. And that allowed us to see those stages of attachment, of which of course there are 4. Melthoff and Moore was the very first study we looked at as part of our attachment topic, and that was that work around those early interactions between the infant and the caregiver, and we looked at those ideas of reciprocity, interactional synchronicity. And just last week, before you did your assessment work, we were looking at Lorenz, and we were talking about how Lorenz was the very starting point of Bowlby's evolutionary theory, and he was the one that saw the imprinting in the goslings, the baby geese. So let's have a look at our find and fix. These were tricky. They were quite subtle mistakes. So first one, it shouldn't say classical conditioning, it should say operant. Now this is important. This is going back to our learning theory, and we concentrated a lot about food and this idea that the infant uses classical conditioning. They associate the mother, who is the neutral stimulus, with the food, and therefore they learn to form that emotional bond with mother. So it was all about the food. But the other side that you'll have read around when I asked you to read through those textbook pages is the operant conditioning. That actually, and it works from both the mother and the baby's point of view, when baby's crying, it's pretty unpleasant for mother. If you've ever been around a screaming baby, you'll understand it's not particularly pleasant. So what mother does is she responds to baby. She gives them a cuddle. If they're crying because they're hungry, she feeds them. She changes their nappy. She's seeing to their needs until the baby stops crying. And so mother learns, remember, any form of conditioning is the way in which we are learning. Mother learns, oh, okay, if I want to stop that unpleasant experience of listening to the baby crying, I need to see to its needs. And the learning theorists see this as the beginnings of that attachment. Now, of course, mother's not aware of this. It's not like a conscious thing. It's not like, oh, I suppose I better look after my baby. But this is what learning theorists say is happening under the surface. You are learning that that's what you need to do. You need to respond to your child's needs in order to stop that unpleasantness of the baby crying. And if we flip it and we think about it from the baby's point of view as well, operant conditioning applies there too. Baby's got an unpleasant feeling of hunger, discomfort, feeling alone, feeling scared by something, all sorts of reasons why an infant might be crying. Too hot, too cold. Baby's got an unpleasant feeling. And they cry, and they very quickly learn that if they cry, then their mother will come and see to them and make it better, which is why the crying behaviour continues. Now, operant conditioning, we know, learning through reinforcement, is another type of learning theory explanation for why these early attachments are forming. Okay, so the next one, it was interactional synchronicity rather than reciprocity. Remember how we remember that? Synchronized swimmers. Everything they do is perfectly in time with each other, perfectly in tune. So we know that these two terms are often used together. They're sometimes even used interchangeably, even though they shouldn't really be because they are different. So we need a way of remembering which one is which. So if you reciprocate something, you do it back. You've seen it, pause, do it back. If you're synchronized, think of those synchronized swimmers. Everything is, they're all doing it at exactly the same time, exactly the same movements. So here, where it's telling us the primary caregiver and the infant move in time with each other, that should have been my clue. Right, okay, that's synchronicity. All right, try and get that clear in your mind, because that's a common mistake. Very subtle mistake on the next one. It was the internal working model, not memory, that blueprint that Bowlby talked about. It's the evolutionary theory, not the learning theory, that suggests that all behaviours, attachment behaviours, are innate. As soon as we see that word innate, we should think, evolutionary. We're born with it. We've evolved to have it. And it's not the 6 stages of attachment. There's only 4 stages of attachment that Schafer and Emerson identified. And that leads nicely on. So for our stages of attachment, there were 4 we could have had. We could have had, as you see there, specific, multiple, asocial, but also indiscriminate would have been the 4th one. So any of those correct. What do we remember? How do we remember Bowlby's evolutionary theory? I'm pausing because I want you to think. How do we remember Bowlby's evolutionary theory? SMACY, that little acronym. So our S, we could have had social releases. Our M, we could, and as I've got there, monotrophy, one main attachment. Our A, adaptation or adaptive. Our C, critical period. And our I, internal working model. And weaknesses of the learning theory. Well, a lot of it is based on animal research, such as Harlow's monkeys. But Harlow and some of the other studies as well that these ideas are based around. But we can use Harlow, can't we, as contradictory evidence? Because Harlow showed us it's not just all about food. The monkeys are attaching to the surrogate mother that gives them the comfort rather than the food. So it's about more than just food. But we've also talked about how this research is very socially sensitive. So we're using our elements from door frame, our evaluation framework there, aren't we? And then the last task, I wanted you to think about it on the flip side. So if it's suggesting that attachment is innate and it's something that we're born with in order to aid our survival, the other side of that is that we're born a blank canvas. What was blank canvas again? What was the fancy way of saying it? The Latin? Tabula rasa. We're born a blank canvas and we have to learn everything, and that includes attachment. Okay, so hopefully that has identified any gaps. So far we're early on in this topic, aren't we? But we need to make sure that any gaps we're picking up now, because knowledge builds on knowledge. Okay, so The focus of today's lesson, as I said to you before, we're looking at Ainsworth's strange situation. Ainsworth, the name of the researcher, Mary Ainsworth. Very important in attachment. People still talk about her now. They still use her research. Okay. And this allowed us to look at attachment types. Now, this is where we have to be really careful not to confuse stages of attachment. Shaffer and Emerson, this idea that you, as you grow older, you sort of progress through the different stages of attachment. This is quite separate. Ainsworth's attachment types are the different types of attachment that she identified in terms of how secure and how stable the attachment is between the infant and the primary caregiver. And you're going to see that as we go on and explore. So the best starting point for this is for you to watch, it's only a few minutes, a short video clip, and the web link is there, and obviously you have this PowerPoint. So use that hyperlink on the PowerPoint on slide 3 in order to go and just watch a few minutes, just to set the scene about Ainsworth's strange situation, what she did. And now you've done that, we're just going to introduce some of the language. Because when Ainsworth and all of the other people that have used Ainsworth's exact same observational study, because it's been replicated, it's been done many, many, many times since, there were things that they were looking out for. As psychologists, when we observe any human behaviour, we have to have a very clear idea of what we're looking for. And we talk about having a coding sheet, actually, which is just a sheet of paper where we've identified our behavioural categories, things that we expect and we're looking to see. And we just do it almost as a tally. And essentially, when Ainsworth was observing these infants in that strange situation where the stranger comes in and mum leaves the room, all of those different situations, they're looking for particular behaviours, and these behaviours are going to allow them to say, right, okay, that's a secure attachment, that isn't. So the first main thing they're looking for is whether or not the child, the infant, is showing proximity seeking. Now we need to break that down. Proximity means closeness, and if you're seeking something, you're looking for it. So do we see the infant looking for to be close to mother? An infant with good attachment, when faced with a strange situation, is likely to stay close to their caregiver. So we look to see that. We also look to see, this is a strange situation, they've never been there before. Yes, there's new toys to play with. Yes, it's exciting to explore a new environment, because remember, these are children that are exploring, they're learning all the time, young children. But in a good attachment, where the infant and its mother has a really strong, stable attachment, we'd expect to see what we call secure base behaviour. And that is where the infant is using mum as a secure base. So they'll go off and explore, and they'll go and look at those new toys over there that look interesting and colourful. But they'll keep looking back to mum, and they might take a toy over to show mum. And they're toing and froing because they're checking it's safe. They're using mum as a secure base, but they are still willing to explore. We see sort of 3 different responses at that stage. And that's what leads to our 3 different attachment types. Most children with a secure attachment to their mum will go off and explore and keep coming back, using her as a secure base. Some children, though, will literally hide behind mum, clinging on, really clingy, cling on to it, wouldn't be willing to go off and explore at all. And then at the other extreme, we've got children who walk through the door, new things to explore, and they never look back. And they're really confident and really independent, and they don't seem to ever acknowledge that mum's in the room. So we have different behaviours that we spot in different types of children. And then we are interested to see what happens when the stranger comes in. Do they show anxiety? And to what extent? It would be normal to show a little bit of anxiety and nervousness around somebody you've never met before. But if it's really extreme, or if they're not bothered at all, then that gets the alarm bells ringing. Well, according to Ainsworth, it does. The same with how they react when they're left. Separation anxiety, we call it. You're being separated from your mother. And then when mum comes back in, what's that reunion behaviour like? What's the infant? Do they go and give mum a big cuddle because, oh, they're so pleased she's back? Do they barely notice that she's come back in the room? Or are they so cross that she left them in the first place, that she dare leave them, that they resist her and push her away and show sort of anger and temper tantrums, or something in between? And what Ainsworth attempted to do from lots of these observations and studying lots of children was to categorise, psychologists love categorising the different types of attachment. But what we have to remember is that children are children, and every child is unique and different, and it's not always easy to place them exactly into a category. But with the strange situation, it's just a short little observational study, highly controlled, in a lab type environment, a controlled environment anyway. And so that's what she attempted to do. So she discovered, or at least she attempted to discover and categorize 3 attachment types, and she gave them letters. And it is absolutely vital that you know your A, B's and C's. Okay, so she found that most children, and we're talking about 75 to 80% of children in most cultures, are securely attached. And she called that type B. Okay, so the majority of children show that secure-based behaviour. They'll explore, but they'll keep coming back to mum. They will be distressed when mum leaves the room, but they can be easily comforted. It's not like it's the end of the world. They will be a little bit anxious and a bit nervous around a stranger, but as long as mum seems to indicate it's safe, they'll soon warm to them, they'll soon be okay. And when mum comes back in, the reunion behaviour, they're going to be delighted. It's going to be all smiles and cuddles. Mummy's back, yay! And most children will show that. But she did identify the other 2 extremes. So we had our type A. Now the way to remember it is A for avoidant. And if you're avoidant, you're avoiding that contact, you're avoiding that closeness. So in type A children, when they go into that strange situation room, oh, there's toys, there's things to explore, I'm off. Not a second look for mum. Not showing secure-based behaviour, not showing any separation anxiety, not particularly bothered by the stranger, but also doesn't seem to show any more affection towards mum than what they do this complete stranger. And then our resistant is our type C, and those are those children who are going to be clingy. So the way I always remember it, A for avoidant, C for clingy. They're the ones who are going to resist at every stage. They're going to resist mum leaving by having the biggest meltdown. They're going to resist mum coming back, the reunion, by temper tantrums, anger, frustration. How dare you leave me? They're not going to be easily comforted. And so we see that kind of real instability there, or Ainsworth would use the term insecurity. So those were essentially her findings. And this study has been replicated around the world thousands of times. And so what we've done over the years is we've built up this picture of the different attachment types and how they vary in different cultures. And of course, a psychologist being psychologists, they want to know why. So people have started to speculate and hypothesize about why a child might show signs of type A or type C, and so on. And we'll explore some of those ideas throughout the coming lessons. So we've got our secure, I trust you. We've got our resistant, I don't trust you, I'm angry, you've left me. And we've got our insecure avoidant, I don't care. And that's a very simplified way of just remembering it and just thinking about it. I've said most of that, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but we're talking approximately, these are very approximate numbers, and you'll see slightly different numbers in different books and studies, because as I say, this study has been replicated thousands of times and it does vary between cultures. But we're talking about 15% of infants will be insecure avoidant, and we're talking about between 70 and 80% of infants will be secure, and around about 15% will be insecure resistant. And we've talked about those same sorts of behaviours. Okay, and you've obviously got this PowerPoint to refer back to. So your next task, again, pause me and do this, and I've attached this sheet on Teams, is to identify for each of our children whether you would think they would show as being type A, B or C if placed in the strange situation. And that's just a way of you getting your head around that, because as I say, it's really important we know our A, B's and C's, and obviously be thinking to yourself, right, how could I justify that choice? What is it? Are they showing exploration behaviour, separation anxiety? Try and think about applying using that language as well. That's so, so important. I would say that will take you probably about 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, and then because with Ainsworth, we have to understand our A, B's and C's. We have to understand what she found in terms of attachment type. But it's also one of those studies, and it's on your knowledge organiser, that we have to know inside out, because it's on our spec. It's named. It's a named study, which means we could get an outline question worth 6 marks, or even a 12-mark question where we had to evaluate it as well. And we'll be moving on, of course, to do that. But you've got to know it. So you've got to know what method it used. It was obviously an observational study, but where did it take place? Highly controlled environment. When? Historical context. Who was involved? How old were the infants? Of course, what did she find? But it's really important that we know this idea that there were 3-minute intervals, and it was a very stepped process. So what I'd like you to do is use that video clip from earlier in the lesson. You could always go back and watch it again. It was only a few minutes. Use your online textbook and again, pause this video and just create a little bit of a flow diagram, identifying what the steps in her study were. And then to the side of it, you can just brainstorm the method, the when, the where, the who, all of that, because that's important detail too. Okay, so pause the video and complete that. And then let's review. So primary caregiver and infant come into the room. You might have not written that as a step. You might have thought, well, that's not important, but it is, because as soon as they come in, that's when we see the exploration behaviour. And if you didn't get some of this language that I've written there in the orange, add it on. Step 2, stranger comes in. So at that point, we're observing, we're looking for stranger anxiety. Step 3, the primary caregiver leaves. So at this point, we're looking for separation behaviour. The primary caregiver comes back in. We're looking for reunion behaviour. Then both the stranger and the primary caregiver leave, so the child is now left on their own. We're again looking for how they react, what's their separation behaviour. And then mum comes back in, primary caregiver comes back in. We're looking for reunion behaviour again. So 6 intervals, highly controlled in a sort of lab environment. That's what Ainsworth's study allowed us to do, because it was so highly controlled, allowed it to be replicated many, many, many times. So we talk about it having high reliability. Okay, so you've essentially what you've just done is this. By doing this flow diagram and by saying the what, the who, the when, and so on, essentially we've just done one of these summarised study cards that we've done many times. And I don't mind which of the 2 formats you have it in. But the important thing here is the devil is in the detail. And in future, you can see the little retrieval icon there. In future lessons, I'll have that, and that will be your retrieval. And I want all of those details there, okay? What some students do is they just focus on what she found and they end up describing type A, B and C. Sometimes the question calls for that, sometimes it doesn't. So you've got to be prepared for either, and you've got to obviously read the questions very carefully. Okay, so we'll review that later. This is your final task. So I'm just looking at the time on this played video. If you've paused it when I've asked you to and completed the tasks as I've asked you to, you're probably getting to about 35-40 minutes now. So your final task, in your OneNote class notebook that I showed you the workings of that on Monday, you've got an attachment folder, and in there there's a page called Types of Attachment Exam Questions. And I think there's 3 or 4 questions. They're all based on this work that we've done today, and you would type your answers into there. It might be that that overruns slightly the 50 minutes, in which case leave it, go and do your other lessons, obviously, be disciplined with your time, but then come back and finish that off as a homework task, because it really won't be more than about 15 minutes or 20 minutes as a homework task. And I will go into your OneNote and mark those for you. It's just applying your knowledge from today, really. Okay? I'll be on Teams, so you can let me know if you're having any problems, and I'll try and talk you through it all.